Hello, denizens of the forest, and welcome to another puzzle video for the Woodland Alliance. Got another pair of puzzles for you today. The first one, let's just jump right in. We've got a rather monochromatic puzzle here for you. As you can see, the Woodland Alliance is going second. The cats went first. Good for them. And the first thing, as always, that we're going to do is to observe. Starting with our hand of supporters, we have rabbit, fox, and bird. And then our hand of cards. 3 rabbit cards. Wow. And right away, you'll see this opens up some pretty interesting possibilities. Pretty much unlimited, it turns out. So, for instance, we could go for this pattern that you will no doubt recognize that I like to call the Triforce, because, well, you know, it looks like a triangle. Anyone who's played Zelda before will know that it represents the forces of wisdom, strength, and knowledge, I think. Those 3 pillars will definitely help you a lot in a game of Root, and I think that the best starting configuration might not actually be this Triforce trio of traits. But let's take a closer look at this board to see if we can determine the best way to deploy our rather fortunate starting sympathy. So as we're going second behind the cats, we actually have a little bit of information about how they've set up their position. They have filled up this clearing's worth of buildings with a single defender. So any sympathy in this clearing is definitely in their best interest to get rid of. Thank goodness the cats have reinforced their central fox clearing right next to the keep with a recruiter to help to establish some control. Very smart on their part. Third of all, they're going for a big play in this mouse clearing. Again, something that I totally support and think is a decent move. I would have put a recruiter there as well, just to give you access to these 2 building slots as well as the cats, but that's neither here nor there. For now, they are doing okay. Let's take a look at the birds next. The birds, starting in the upper right-hand corner, have selected the charismatic leader to begin with. That means they have a bird card in battle and will definitely need to move in order to find somebody to battle. That somebody might be your sympathy, turns out, or a cat. Since the cats haven't moved anybody, there's lots and lots of targets for the Eyrie. Most notably, the Eyrie does have access to the southern route to attack this cat. Keep that in mind, that will become important later. Third, let's go to our rascally friend, the Vagabond. Vagabond, starting in a rather unusual clearing. I don't know why people start in clearings that aren't this one. I just feel like it's such a better decision to start in this forest. Look how many clearings you have access to. People, you're trying to be fancy, and I get it, but I'm just telling you, start with the most flexible opening you can. It makes your opponents twist themselves up in knots to try and figure out what you want to do. Because if you're starting in this first, look, you're going here or you're going here. Already, that makes my tactical decision making so much easier, and it lets me play a bit more optimally, and you just want to prevent that if you're an opponent of mine. That being said, path of least resistance, as we've said before, up to this clearing, down to Texas, and then out to New Jersey. So generally the Vagabond is going to be moving this direction, but that does mean that the Vagabond will be sticking around in these 2 clearings for the first couple turns. So any sympathy in there is vulnerable to an attack. With that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at our supporters. We have 3 rabbit cards in hand that could all easily become rabbit supporters. We have a bit of an interesting card draw this time around because we have 2 identical cards. We have 2 cobblers in hand. If you haven't played with the base deck in a long time, if you're playing the E&P deck like some kind of cool person, maybe you've forgotten at this point, but Cobbler is maybe one of the best cards to craft if you're the Woodland Alliance. Having a free move at the beginning of your evening phase is just great when the rest of your actions take place during the evening phase. And given our starting hand of supporters, I would say it's actually possible to craft one of these cobblers on turn 1 if you're the Woodland Alliance here. And because we've actually got 2 of them in hand, well, that just makes our decision twice as easy. We're going to mobilize one, and we're going to craft the other. Easy peasy. But in order to craft one of these cards, we're going to have to take over 2 rabbit clearings, and that does kind of limit our decision making when it comes to placing our opening sympathy as the Woodland Alliance. That means we have to use that bird's supporter as a rabbit card. as a rabbit supporter. And because the keep is in a rabbit clearing, that means that we have 3 rabbit clearings to work with. Here, here, and here. And there's only 2 of those that are connected by a fox clearing. And you know which ones they are. So that means if we want to craft Cobbler, we have to spread sympathy like this. This is a configuration that we have not seen very frequently. I like to call this configuration the Canadian telescope, because this clearing up here is Canada. It's Canada because it is only connected to 2 other clearings, and generally remains one of the most peaceful clearings on the Autumn map in general. If we decide to go for the Canadian telescope just to craft Cobbler, I would say maybe that's a stretch. Does that really set us up for an okay game as the Woodland Alliance? Say, for instance, that both of these are attacked. Do we want a base in Canada? And I would say definitely not. We would definitely want to avoid having a base there, if at all possible. But that being said, there are some factors that make this distribution of sympathy something to consider. First of all, if we craft Cobbler, we can place both of these in our supporters, and that does come with the rather unique threat. Essentially, if you revolt in a rabbit clearing while having sympathy in a second rabbit clearing, you would start with 2 warriors at your base. And with Cobbler already crafted, it's essentially like you get a free move and organize, or a free move and recruit on your very first turn. Not bad. Not a bad start at all. A rather accelerated start for the Woodland Alliance. An ideal start, I would say. That seems to be worth going for in this case. Another interesting thing to consider with this opening, it really puts the birds in a kind of interesting spot. If they want to, for instance, take the most direct path towards the keep, it's often rather simplistic but useful to frame the opening stages of a game of Root as a contest between the army factions, in this case the birds and the cats. But if the birds want to take the most aggressive and direct route towards the keep, they would have to cross through a sympathetic territory. Being the birds, they likely won't have a card in hand anyway, so does this matter to them, especially when they're starting with a charismatic who has a battle? Maybe, maybe not, but that's the beauty of having a backup. The downside to having Canada as a base is perhaps outweighed by having extra actions for the whole game, and perhaps setting up for future revolts. Something you'll have to weigh. But in general, I imagine the birds would be maybe dissuaded from taking this most direct route and will instead seek greener pastures in the south. The Vagabond, for their part, if they are going to end their turn in this clearing, they might clear out that sympathy. It's a risk you have to take. If the Vagabond is interested in clearing out sympathy, then they do open the door for the Eyrie to just plunge straight ahead into the central clearing, and maybe they want that, maybe they don't. Not always possible to tell with the rascally Vagabond. So I would say this is an extremely active clearing to spread sympathy to, as there's multiple factions that are pressuring it. It's a busy clearing. More likely than not, you're going to end up with a Canada base. But like I said, with Cobbler being crafted, it's like you're working with an extra officer for the entire game, so that might not be as much of a handicap as it otherwise might. Okay, now that we've kind of analyzed that, are there any other strategic possibilities with this opening hand? As we mentioned, the Triforce is always possible. Good, sturdy Triforce. There's something to be said for a play down here. Once again, restricting the Eyrie, pressuring the cats in this clearing, and hoping for a revolt here on turn 2. Not bad. You've got some room to maneuver. Hopefully that would push the birds more towards the middle and create some friction between these 2 bases. We've seen this motif in the past. I would say this is viable, but again, it really depends on the Eyrie and what they are up to on their first turn. What I will say about spreading sympathy to the lower corner, down here, this is the lazy boy. Spreading sympathy down here, it does sort of dodge any Vagabond pressure, right? This is our path of least resistance. There's no Vagabond pressure, probably. Most likely you'll see some action in this clearing, and perhaps you'll see some action in this clearing, but this is almost a guaranteed base. So I would say this is the more conservative approach. I think given the choice for me, I would try and craft Cobbler on turn 1 and shoot for the moon, because have some ambition. You know, you're the Woodland Alliance. You got to try and get your engine going. Okay. So that's our first puzzle. We're going to move on to puzzle number 2. Nice Rioja. All right, we're on to puzzle number 5. As you'll see, we're going 3rd in this puzzle before the poor cats. First thing we're going to do, as always, is observe. Starting with our supporters, we have 2 fox and a bird in our supporters. And then we look at our hand, we have a bird, a rabbit, and a fox. But not just any bird. That, my friends, is a bird ambush. And, ooh, you know it's going to be a good Woodland Alliance game when you start with a bird ambush in your hand. Why do I say that? Well, it just makes it way easier to get a base. Right away, you'll see that there is one suit that's jumping out to us, and that's fox. And what have we said on this channel from day one? It's all about Texas, baby. If you can get a base, you want it to be Texas. But just to be sure, let's take a look at all of our fox clearings. And I'm going to ask you to pause the video in a second here and tell me which of these fox clearings can we eliminate from contention for a fox base. All right, for those of you who paused the video, congratulations. And for those of you who just want to find out what the answer is, it's obviously this one. We're getting rid of this one. We're never having a base here because it's right next to the keep. We are limited to expanding in 2 directions. Neither one will be easy when we're right next to the keep. Maybe this one will be a little easy. But still, it paints the Woodland Alliance into a corner. They'll have to spend the entire game trying to bust out or trying to somehow get a warrior over to this side of the board. Not an easy proposition. No, so we're going to go ahead and ignore this fox clearing for the time being, and instead take a look at our other 3 options. Since we start with 2 fox supporters and 1 bird, we can easily just mobilize this fox clearing and spread here and blow up the birds, right? Well, sure. But I think that's a bit of a risky strategy, and here's why. They've started with the despot. This is a rather strange despot. They have 3 cards and moves, so their first turn they moved here, and then they moved here. Alright, that's a lot of movement. So by putting a card here, you're not, in this top fox clearing, you're not actually pressuring them too much. They can always access some open clearing to find another base. If they can't fight you in this clearing, they'll just evacuate. It's 1 point, and you would be surrounded by a wall of birds. I'm generally pretty against trying to take out the home roost of the birds on turn 1 as the Woodland Alliance, just because I think it's just not that good of a clearing to control for a base. No, with a bird that has a ton of movement but no battle, what you want to do is cut off their lanes of movement, ideally. So let's get rid of that top fox clearing, and let's instead look at everyone's favorite, Texas. If you spread sympathy to Texas, you can spread sympathy to one other clearing, mobilize this fox card, call it a day. You're probably getting a base because of that ambush. I would say one thing that jumps out right away is just spreading over here and creating this nice high block on the bird's progress on the lower left side of the board. Hopefully with this kind of move, you would sort of channel the bird's energy over in this direction, hopefully putting them in conflict with the cats on the right hand side, and maybe even getting them into this clearing in the middle right, which would put a ton of pressure on the keep. It would be such a thorn in the side of the cats. I think that would be a great outcome from the Woodland Alliance if we can just sort of like divert their effort generally towards the right. That's my argument for these 2 here. Nice pair there. But before we get too attached to these clearings, we might as well look at our rascally friend the Vagabond. We've got the Tinker this game, generally a peaceful character, and the Tinker has already explored a ruins here in Texas and moved in this direction. Likely meaning that the Tinker will be in these 2 clearings for the next 2 turns. So it's starting to look like a base in Texas is a looming reality here. Turn 1 for the Woodland Alliance. I mean, that's pretty nice. That's what you want, right? I would say maybe the choices then would be, what is the secondary clearing to place sympathy in? And where should you deploy the ambush if you have to use it? To answer these questions, let's look at the turn order really quick. Vagabond goes first, birds go second, and the cats, who are cut off by the screen, are going fourth. With that knowledge, you know that the cats are going to have first crack at this sympathy if they attack at all. So here's what I would say. If the cats attack in Texas, you use the ambush in Texas. If, for instance, you've spread to these two clearings and they attack over here in Oregon, just wait. You can let it go. It's okay. They can have Oregon. You don't need it. This puzzle is pretty simple. It just revolves around creating this high block for the Eyrie, saving that ambush for Cat's attack here in this fox clear, and then revolting there on turn 2, setting you up for a great game. In terms of what to mobilize, I would say mobilize the protection racket, save your second fox supporter for a base, and then just go ahead and hold on to both of these cards, this cobbler and this bird ambush. All right, well, this has been 2 more Woodland Alliance puzzles for the opening. I feel like these ones were a little bit more simple than the last ones we've covered. For the next video, we'll definitely cover some more thorny opening considerations, but I hope this is helping to add to your opening repertoire for the Woodland Alliance on the autumn map. I've had some great feedback so far, by the way, on differing opinions from mine, and I think that is all part of a good and robust debate, and I look forward to more of that in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been Waterman121 bringing you more Woodland Alliance puzzles, and I'll see you around the woodland.